This senseless act of violence took place over 25 years ago. The silence of the evening streets in Greene County, Tennessee, USA, was shattered by the sound of gunfire. Law enforcement quickly recognized the scene. The officers found a murdered family at the site, shot and stacked on top of each other. Now, they had to solve one of the most shocking cases in American criminal history. The father of the family, Lillelid, came from Bergen, Norway. Despite his young age of only 20, he decided to embark on a fateful journey and ended up in Florida, USA. Here, the young man wanted to fulfill his dreams. He was the youngest of 4 children in his family and had been a modest, kind, and positive young man from a young age. He dreamed of having a wife and children, and a good future for them. Lillelid met Delphina, who was born in New Jersey in March 1969. The couple decided to move to Miami and got married in February of the following year. In 1991, the newlyweds had their first child, a girl they named Tabitha. Soon, the couple realized they wanted a quieter life. Away from the hustle and bustle of Miami, they began searching for a more peaceful place to grow their family and ended up on the outskirts of Knoxville, Tennessee, in a suburb called Powell. It was a typical American suburb, quiet and peaceful with idyllic views of nature and a tight-knit community. The young couple was warmly welcomed by the residents of the town. It seemed as though their search for a better place to live had ended, and they could enjoy life in peace. In 1995, the couple had a son named Peter. The Lillelids decided to buy a larger house so that each family member could have their own room. They moved into a 50-year-old house in 1996, one of the most remarkable creations of architectural genius, located in the suburb. Once the family moved in, they immediately began making ambitious plans for the future. To live a full life, extensive repairs on the old house and various household structures were necessary. The couple enthusiastically set to work, with the top priority being the renovation of the guest house where Delphina's mother was supposed to live. The young family was not wealthy and had bought the house because of its low price. They were aware of the amount of work needed but were determined to overcome all difficulties together. Their friends and relatives remembered the Lillelids as people dedicated to their faith and family. They worked tirelessly. Delphina worked in a local restaurant and dedicated her free time to raising Tabitha and Peter, envisioning a bright and wonderful future for her children. The Lillelids were very religious. In April 1997, the local community held a large congress in a neighboring state, a gathering for everyone wanting to deepen their faith and learn how best to do so. April 6, 1997, was the last day of these meetings. The community invited the family for dinner, but the Lillelids were eager to get home and lacked the necessary funds. They had spent most of their savings on the trip and new clothes for all family members to fit into the Congress atmosphere. The young couple and their children were grateful for the invitation but decided to celebrate in a smaller circle. On their way back, they planned a picnic to celebrate the occasion and create a party atmosphere for the children. As they traveled, Peter complained of a severe headache. It was already 7:30 p.m. and it was starting to get dark. Lillelid pulled off the highway near Greene County, Tennessee, parked at a rest area, and decided to take a walk with the boy to clear his head. Meanwhile, Delphina and Tabitha went to the restroom, where they encountered a few strange girls. At the restroom exit, Peter and his father were already standing across from the spot where the family had stopped. They had finished their walk, and Peter felt better as they waited for the return of his mother and Tabitha to organize a snack. At that moment, they were noticed by several people. In Knoxville, there was a small motel called the Colonial Motel, where a bunch of young people from Kentucky had checked into one of the rooms. There were 6 of them: 18-year-old Natasha Cornett, 17-year-old Karen Howell, 20-year-old Joseph Risner, 14-year-old Jason Bryant, 19-year-old Edward Dean Marlin, and 18-year-old Crystal Sturgill. Most of them had trouble with the law, abusive parents, dysfunctional families, and domestic violence. These young men and women found it hard in school and banded together to survive, loitering around and leading an unhealthy lifestyle. They consumed alcohol and illegal substances. The young people lived in different towns, roamed the country, stayed in motels, and usually rented a room for an extended period. This time, they checked into the Colonial Motel on April 4th, just a few days before they struck with their truly inhuman brutality in Tennessee. The young men drew attention from the motel management in the first few days due to their strange and defiant behavior. They painted pentagrams and tridents on the walls and brought necessary utensils. Feeling free from the control of the older generation, the youths ignored moral and social norms. Initially, it all had the character of occultism and self-mutilation. At night, candles flickered in front of the windows. Some of these young men and women used razor blades to cut each other's hands. This action was not only a protest against the suffering but also a cry for help that went unheard. Society was indifferent to them. Most had endured years of cruelty and tyranny, leading them to a series of brutal events. The young people often behaved inappropriately, causing significant damage to the hotel room, breaking many pieces of furniture, and painting the walls. The ordinary room quickly became a hideout for drug addicts, regularly engaging in what could be called ritual acts. It reflected their inner chaos and anger. When Delphina and her daughter saw the 2 girls in the restroom, they turned out to be guests of the hotel, Natasha and Karen. At first glance, they seemed like normal teenagers but were, in reality, real lunatics with a long history of drug addiction and petty crime. They eagerly participated in occult activities and satanic rituals. Ready to cross the line of what was permissible, psychiatrists who later worked with these young people found that they were simply trying to find their place in life. The young men were victims of years of torture and cruelty, manifesting as hatred for the world. They were on a level where bloodthirstiness and violence had become the norm and a way to assert themselves among their peers. Obviously, they had no good intentions or kindness in their minds. They created an underground community ready to do more than just silently draw pentagrams. They wanted revenge, as brutal as possible. The leader of the group was Natasha Cornett. She declared that she would trigger the Armageddon and claimed that they could not be stopped and were determined to take revenge on the entire world. Natasha had made similar confessions before, but no one had paid much attention to them. It was probably the lack of interest and ignoring her words that led to these extremes. Natasha claimed to have been talking to angels and demons since childhood. From a young age, she called herself the daughter of Satan and was obsessed with witchcraft, which was exacerbated by her abuse of alcohol and illegal substances. By 7th grade, she developed an eating disorder that led to hospitalization in Lexington. Doctors diagnosed her with severe manic depressive disorder, anxiety, and an obsessive desire to harm herself and others. At the age of 14, she was admitted to a psychiatric clinic for disturbed teenagers. The doctors did everything to help Natasha resolve her socialization and family problems. Unfortunately, this did not bring the expected success. At 17, Natasha found her love and was married for a while to a man named Stephen Cornett. However, when he realized he was dealing with an abnormal person and saw how dangerous she was, he decided to separate from her. This disturbed Natasha's fragile mental balance, and her condition worsened after moving to New Orleans, where she became the victim of a brutal attack involving 5 men. This event caused her severe emotional distress and worsened her mental disorders. Natasha dreamed of experiencing a film like Killing Spree, with a young couple traveling across America and killing anyone who got in their way. Once, she even threatened her mother with a knife and ran away from home. At the time of the events in question, she was at the height of her problems, posing a real threat to herself and others. To find a way to realize her film dream, Natasha gathered like-minded people around her after running away from home. Many of them had similar issues. Natasha's best friend was Karen Howell, who was also into witchcraft. She came from a broken family, had a long history of substance and alcohol abuse, and was constantly causing trouble, even at home. During her school years, her parents had serious relationship problems, and she repeatedly witnessed violent confrontations and physical abuse by her father. Like her best friend, she was obsessed with harming herself and others. She attempted suicide 4 times. Karen exhibited erratic behavior and was unable to integrate into school, changing 4 schools due to constant quarrels and complaints from teachers. Eventually, she was homeschooled, but staying in a toxic home made things worse. During this time, she began holding Ouija sessions and trying to communicate with demonic beings. On top of that, she regularly used drugs. She became the second passenger in the car, carrying weapons for the gang. At the wheel of the broken-down car was Karen's boyfriend, Joseph Risner. Joseph was born on October 13, 1976, in Hazard. He did not know his biological father and took his stepfather's last name. In 1986, the family moved to Georgia, but the parents' relationship significantly deteriorated there. Later, they divorced, and his mother, Mary, became actively involved in church activities. By this time, Joseph was already known as a drug addict. He had started using drugs at the age of 10 and quickly moved on to hard substances. Joseph claimed to have had intimate experiences with 2 nannies who took care of him when he was 12 years old. In 1993, his mother remarried, and at 18, Joseph continued to use illegal substances, leading to problematic interactions with peers. Joseph dated Natasha Cornett for a while before they broke up, but their friendship remained. Afterward, he dated her best friend, Karen. In 1995, he joined the army, hoping for a military career, but he failed because of his drug use and was discharged. Joseph decided to leave everything behind and joined a group gathered by Natasha. At this time, Natasha was the group's leader and had met a new boyfriend, Edward Dean Marlin. He had recently joined them. Edward was born on January 26, 1978, and had lived in a decent family for a long time. He seemed like a normal teenager, avoiding trouble with the law and not engaging in criminal activities, working at a local grocery store. Edward was very religious and attended church with his family. But that changed when he met Natasha. The girl clearly dominated him, causing negative and disturbing changes in his behavior. He stopped going to church and turned to the dark side. His parents noticed what was happening and tried to intervene in the relationship to bring their son back to his normal life. But Natasha's influence was stronger than his mother's words. He ran away from home and moved into a motel. Their love went so far that the couple planned a wedding. The youngest in the group was 14-year-old Jason, born on July 18 in the small mining town of Hellier. Despite his young age, he had long been on the police radar and was on probation at the time of the events in question. The main problems began after he encountered drugs and alcohol. In fact, the young man's troubles started much earlier than meeting Natasha. At school, he was found to have developmental delays, with an IQ not exceeding 85. This led to negative emotional and social shifts. His parents were indifferent to what was happening, worsening the situation. After meeting Natasha, he decided to join the group. During this time, he was participating in a rehabilitation program. Professionals worked with him, trying to reintegrate him into normality, but in the end, it was not enough. The young man gave up. Natasha and Jason drank each other's blood, calling it an act of great love. They truly believed that such a thing would strengthen their bond. Crystal Sturgill was born on March 13, 1979, in the town of Harold. In elementary school, her grades were above average, but that changed when she started high school and began using drugs. The girl experienced no major shocks in her early years, making her seem the most normal of the group. She had at most a few quarrels over her younger brother, who was bullied at school. She smoked in the locker room, incurring the wrath of teachers. In December 1996, more serious problems began. Crystal reached puberty, started constantly arguing with her parents, and running away from home. There was a police report. The girl said that her stepfather had long abused and repeatedly raped her, stopping only when she had a boyfriend. The stepfather denied these accusations, and those close to him sided against the girl, calling her a liar. As a result of the court proceedings, she was placed in social services, moving through 13 different families before meeting Natasha and joining the group. Natasha Cornett's plans for Armageddon began to come true on April 6. The group broke into the house of a police officer living in a neighboring district. Jason caused a disturbance outside to distract the homeowner while the others sneaked in and stole 9mm and .25 caliber pistols, 2 boxes of ammunition, and $500 in cash. From that point, their plan for the apocalypse took shape. Then they drove back to Knoxville, where they would begin their bloody march. Joseph drove a blue Chevrolet station wagon used by a gang of crazed youths. The car was in such poor condition that it looked like it would not survive the trip and fall apart halfway. Because of this, the driver was in a hurry, exceeding the speed limit by more than 30 miles per hour before being stopped by the police. They received a fine, but that was the least of the legal problems the young people faced. They were eventually released, and all 6 armed individuals passed the traffic stop unscathed. The young men realized they needed a suitable vehicle to carry out their plans, so one of the primary tasks was to find a vehicle to steal. It was necessary to act quickly and decisively before the Chevrolet really broke down. So, a group of disturbed youths with weapons set out to commit terrible crimes. They loitered around, coming up with a plan. Then they met the Lillylid family on their way home, stopping at the restroom. As Karen and Natasha lingered in the restroom, the other car occupants discussed the crime. The young men realized they had left a trail when they received a fine for speeding. At this point, they had stolen weapons, money, and ammunition in the car. They knew they could be caught and that this would be grounds for serious charges. To avoid prosecution, the Satanists wanted to remodel the car. They first thought they could burn it. At this point, the youths saw Peter and his father when the Lillylid family stopped at the parking lot where the teenagers were and immediately caught their attention. As Delphina left the restroom, she was confronted by Natasha and Karen, who were dressed in dark clothing. The woman asked the girls if they believed in God, which the teenagers denied. Delphina then offered them a religious brochure, and her naive and kind husband invited the young people to a picnic. The Satanists noticed that the family had traveled in a Dodge, which seemed perfect for their bloodthirsty plans. A sinister plan formed in the young men's minds. Against this backdrop, the criminals decided to act. Naturally, they agreed and joined the family's meal. Joseph and Jason were the first to arrive at the table, followed almost immediately by Natasha and Karen. Joseph took advantage of the situation and returned to the car where Edward and Crystal were sitting. In a whisper, he told the couple they were ready for action. He took the 9mm pistol and told Edward to take the .25mm pistol. As he approached the family with the pistols, the friendly Joseph changed. He slowly walked back across the parking lot, ensuring no random witnesses were around, then pointed the weapon at Lilylid, apologizing for what was happening and saying nothing would happen to them if they obeyed. At gunpoint, he escorted the car owners to the minivan. Lilylid offered them money and the car in exchange for their freedom, but the Satanists wanted to take all four from the parking lot to a remote location. They forced the whole family into the van, where Natasha, Karen, Joseph, and Jason sat. Joseph's Chevrolet followed them, leaving Edward and Crystal behind. Lilylid drove the minivan with the 9mm pistol in hand to control the man's actions. Inside the van, the atmosphere was tense, and Delphina began singing to 6-year-old Tabitha to calm the little girl. Jason ordered them to be gagged, and Natasha offered the child chocolates. They drove a few miles before turning onto the first side road they could find. They drove a few more miles before stopping at an isolated spot. The Lilylids held hands and prayed to God to save them from this evil. The Satanists began to debate what to do next. From this point, their stories diverged significantly. Natasha feared letting the family go, thinking they might betray them, but she didn't want to hurt the children. Lilylid and Delphina offered money again in exchange for their lives, pleading to be let go and promising not to go to the police. The young gang argued among themselves. Some wanted to kill the entire family. Jason didn't want to let the captives go but promised not to harm the children. He convinced Karen and Natasha to return to the van where Joseph was. Then shots were fired outside. The 34-year-old Lilylid was shot multiple times. The first bullet hit his eye, and then the attacker shot him 5 times in the chest at close range using both stolen pistols. Then the shooter fired 8 times at Delphina, shattering her thigh with 2 bullets and hitting her arm with 1. The young mother was then shot in the stomach as she lay on the ground. According to the medical examiner, the 28-year-old Delphina did not die immediately but fought in pain for about 20 minutes after the attack. However, the youth's cruelty didn't end there. They did not keep their promise and pursued the children. This reconstruction of events is based on Natasha's statements, which align best with the found evidence, but even her account is not considered completely reliable. Natasha claimed from the start that Jason was the shooter, while Jason defended himself, saying he was incapable of such cruelty. He claimed Joseph was the shooter, while Joseph said he sat in the van with his eyes closed to avoid seeing what was happening. The police believed all the criminals were involved in the massacre. But Jason was a special case because he was a minor and could not be legally held accountable as an adult, which carried the death penalty for such a brutal crime. The perpetrators were caught relatively quickly. A construction worker near the massacre site was sleeping in a building and heard the shots. Initially, he thought they were hunters and ignored the sound, but then there was an eerie silence and loud laughter. As the man admitted, the sound sent a chill down his spine. More shots followed. This combination of frightening noises seemed suspicious to the construction worker, who called the police. At the crime scene, investigators found a gruesome sight: 4 bodies stacked in a ditch. When the police discovered the bodies, Delphina was still twitching in pain, but that stopped after a few minutes. The man was dead. Tabitha lay on her father's stomach, breathing despite the terrible gunshot wound. Peter lay face down in the dirt next to his mother. When the officer approached to turn him over, the boy screamed. The officer stayed with him, called the paramedics, and held his hand until the ambulance arrived. The children were airlifted to a regional hospital, where doctors continued to fight for their lives. Unfortunately, 6-year-old Tabitha soon died. Only a few dozen meters away stood an abandoned blue Chevrolet with headlights dimly illuminating the darkness. Tire tracks of another vehicle were also found there, later used to identify the couple's van. A plan for a manhunt was announced, and all nearby roads were closed. All vehicles were searched. The Chevrolet, which the young crazies had left at the massacre site, was crucial. The license plate was quickly found, and it turned out it had been torn off and thrown away a kilometer from the scene. This led the police to contact Joseph's mother, who had reported her son's car stolen 2 days before the incident. She also mentioned Natasha, with whom her son planned to flee to Mexico. The car with the young people was stopped at the Mexican border. They had no documents with them. On April 8, around 5 p.m., they reached the U.S. border, where their vehicle was checked against the database. It was found that the car was reported stolen and the perpetrators were possibly involved in a triple murder. The Satanists were then escorted back by police officers. Natasha Cornett, 18, Karen Howell, 17, Joseph Risner, 20, Jason Bryant, 14, Edward Dean Marlin, 19, and Crystal Sturgill, 18, were arrested. After the young people were arrested, they quickly confessed to the car theft. When it became clear that it was pointless to deny the murders, they told an absurd story that the family had died in an accident, as if they had been run over by a van while turning around. All this supposedly happened by accident, but the police knew the family had been shot. After the arrest, it was found that Jason had gunshot wounds to his arm and leg. There were very contradictory statements about the origin of these injuries. The teenager himself claimed he had been shot by Joseph when he refused to take the blame for the massacre. Others believed the young man did it himself to create a convincing alibi. Even before the trial began, the judge was repeatedly asked by the defense to hold separate hearings for each defendant. The lawyers also requested to move the trial to another district where the incident was not widely known. All these requests were denied. The 4 older participants faced the death penalty, while Karen and Jason faced life imprisonment without parole. Faced with this threat, the local community came together, demanding the death penalty for these bloodthirsty subhumans. Every session saw a crowd outside the courthouse chanting, "Burn in hell." During the interrogations, each Satanist tried to blame the others. Most accused Jason because of his young age. However, all stories were different, making it impossible to determine the exact chronology of events and understand who exactly shot the Lillylid family. There is still debate about this today. The judge concluded that each person played a role leading to the inevitable shooting of the family. Not everyone pulled the trigger, but all were present at the kidnapping and murder and did nothing to stop it. No one helped or saved the family, even though the opportunity was there. Consequently, each of them was guilty. The hearing began in March 1998. By then, all 6 had pleaded guilty on the advice of their lawyers as part of a deal with the prosecution, guaranteeing them life sentences without parole and helping them avoid the death penalty. However, this lenient solution had many opponents among the locals who demanded the execution of the young monsters, who did not deserve leniency. To this day, the 6 perpetrators try to reopen the case in their defense, claiming they were too young to understand what they were doing and could not stand up to the others. They continue to deny their involvement, blaming each other. Natasha, the group's leader, was the first to appeal, but she was denied like the others. In 2017, Karen wrote a letter stating she was innocent, had nothing to do with the family's shooting, and did not deserve a life sentence like the other murderers. She dispelled some rumors that their group was a sect and that they had arranged the bodies in the shape of a cross, calling it all false and claiming they were just a group of disturbed teenagers. Peter, the 2-year-old who miraculously survived, took a long time to recover mentally and physically and now has to wear an eye prosthesis for the rest of his life. The family of Lilylid and Delphina later fought for custody. The boy eventually moved to Sweden to live with his aunt. He never fully recovered from the incident. But as an adult, he returned to the United States, where he started a family and made a career. To this day, it cannot be said with certainty what exactly happened on that deserted road where the family was shot at close range. Even today, locals who have never experienced such brutality remember this tragedy with horror. Thanks for watching, and take care.
How much do we know about the people we run into every day on the street? Perhaps something dark and dangerous lurks behind the calm facade. Today's story will provoke thought about what might be lurking in the depths of an ordinary person's soul. Some people are born to create, to shine like the stars. Unfortunately, even they are not immune to encounters with those who can interrupt their creativity for a few $100s. In 2006, among the many offices converted from apartments in Manhattan was the studio of a fairly famous actress, director, and screenwriter named Adrienne Shelly. Her real last name was Livin. She was born on June 24, 1966 in Queens, New York, USA. At the age of 2, the girl moved with her family to Long Island. From a young age, Adrienne had a natural predisposition for acting skills. She was a genuine little actress. When her parents noticed this, they tried to support the child in discovering her talents by enrolling her in various theaters and acting classes. At the age of 10, Adrienne found herself in one of the most popular art centers. Many famous actors trained there, including Robert Downey Jr. and Natalie Portman. It was here that the young Adrienne realized that the stage was her calling. At the age of 11, she landed her first proper role, the lead role in a musical. She later admitted that this was the impetus for further successes. Parallel to her favorite activities, she was a normal teenager who enjoyed spending time with friends with whom she had no problems thanks to her sociability. Everything seemed to be going well, but at the age of 12, she suffered her first bereavement. Her father, Sheldon, passed away suddenly. From that moment on, she decided to use the stage name Shelley to immortalize her father's name. Sheldon always supported the young talent more than her mother did. After her father's death, her mother even tried to steer her daughter in a different direction, suggesting Adrienne choose a more traditional path for her university studies. She encouraged her interest in the film industry and acting, but believed it was a very saturated field with strong competition, making it difficult to succeed. Perhaps her daughter should have chosen something easier, but the young actress was unstoppable. And from the beginning, Adrienne confidently pursued her chosen path. She studied at Boston University in the Faculty of Film Production, specializing in directing. Judging by most sources, she never completed her university studies, but the knowledge she gained was enough to succeed in the future. Her persistence had the greatest effect, as she never lost faith in herself and always kept going. At the age of 18, she moved out of her parents' house with 3 others she studied with at university. They all wanted to become actresses, but initially everything was limited to castings and failures, at least for her friends. But this is a common situation in the film industry. The competition was always very high. Adrienne did not give up hope of finding herself in cinema. She dedicated all her free time to searching for roles and managed to land a few smaller roles in films as an extra. This was enough to stay afloat. In 1989, there was a groundbreaking event. She met the director Hal Hartley, who offered her a lead role in the film The Unbelievable Truth. For Adrienne, it became a stellar moment and the official start of her acting career. Her warm relationship with the director worked very well. She became his muse. This allowed her to get one role after another in his films. Thus, the aspiring actress gained recognition not only in New York but also in Hollywood. She gradually established herself in the largest center of film production in the United States. She was given the green light. She received several offers from Los Angeles for leading film roles, but Adrienne Shelly rejected most of them. She wanted to stay here and continue to expand her career. New York was a more powerful center of the film industry for her, even more so than Hollywood. Adrienne Shelly did not miss the opportunity to develop further. She focused on her work and methodically created the foundation for further success without moving away, and it worked. She starred in many films, especially in independent productions and comedies. During this time, Adrienne came up with the idea that she wanted to try her hand as a screenwriter and director. In 2001, she met a man named Andy Ostroy, with whom she began a romantic relationship. The couple married, and in 2003 the lovers had a daughter named Sophie. While she was still pregnant, the future mother began writing a screenplay for the film Waitress, a romantic comedy. The script was very true to life. The protagonist was pregnant and had to flee her abusive husband, who terrorized her in their marriage. This was quite risky, as pregnancy in films is traditionally portrayed positively. Adrienne Shelly, however, highlighted another side of this delicate situation by emphasizing the difficulties a woman faces during this time. She believed that this vision would clearly work as something innovative. After Sophie's birth, the woman decided to continue working in the film industry. The film actually became a success. It was a genuine stellar moment for Adrienne. The film was presented to the public in 2007. Adrienne directed it herself and played one of the main roles, but she was not granted the triumph. While working on Waitress, she rented an office on Abingdon Square in the West Village in Manhattan. It was a standard apartment where Adrienne spent her time alone. It had become something of an island of security for her. Adrienne created a special atmosphere there. The woman treated the improvised studio with great love and respect. She was sensitive, even overly so. Everyone who visited her workplace noticed this. It was obvious that Adrienne Shelly had a great future ahead of her. The tragic end to her burgeoning career was all the more terrifying and shocking. November 1, 2006 was a completely normal day for the family. As always, Adrienne woke up early and got ready for work in her office. Husband Andy and daughter Sophie woke up as usual. The husband had to take the girl to daycare. Since he was also an actor and producer, he drove to work afterward, dropping his wife off on the way. The couple usually maintained constant contact during the day. They called each other and talked about all the events happening around them. They continued this tradition for years. But on November 1, Adrienne Shelly was silent, which seemed very unusual. She didn't call even once and didn't answer her husband's calls. Initially, this didn't particularly worry Andy. He knew how dedicated his wife was to her work. Perhaps she was very busy, as she wanted to start several new projects that day. The man decided she was simply too engrossed and didn't want to distract her unnecessarily. His work lasted until the evening. After finishing his shift, Andy called his wife again, who once again ignored him. This all started to seem strange. Around 5:30 p.m., Andy picked up his daughter from daycare. Adrienne was still unreachable. The situation was starting to become genuinely worrying. Whenever her spouse was busy, she found time to communicate with her husband. She should have at least called back or sent a message that she was very busy. But this time, it all seemed increasingly disturbing. The weather in New York left much to be desired, and so Andy often picked up his wife from her rented office on such gloomy days. He planned to do the same this time, so he called his wife to arrange a meeting. Again, she didn't pick up. Andy could no longer calm down. His wife's behavior seemed too untypical. He took the child to her grandmother and asked her to look after Sophie while he went to his wife's office. Andy did not have a spare key to her office. When he arrived at the residential building, he went directly to the doorman, who should have a master key. The doorman refused to give it to the man because of strict rules, so Andy tried to persuade him to go upstairs together. The doorman knew Adrienne Shelley well, partly because she was already a celebrity and he also knew her husband. The employee noted, however, that Adrienne had not left the building all day. It was too late. The woman had to finish her work and was on her way home. The concierge agreed to Andy's suggestion but stayed on the floor, handing over the keys. However, they were not needed. The door was unlocked. The actress had a habit of treating her office with great care. She always locked it, even if she was only leaving for a short time. Naturally, she locked the door from the inside so that no one was in the way. Upon entering the studio, the man immediately noticed his wife's clothes and shoes, which were in their usual place. There was a special spot for them, so she had to be inside. Andy immediately called out to her, but no one responded. The tension grew more and more. Desperately, he searched all the rooms for his wife. Grocery bags stood untouched in the kitchen. The sheet was torn from the bed in the bedroom, but there was no trace of the woman. Andy made his way to the bathroom, where he discovered the body of 40-year-old Adrienne Shelley. The woman appeared to be hanging from a sheet fastened to the shower rod. Horrified, the man screamed and immediately tried to free his wife to help her. The building superintendent was on the landing at the time. He heard the screams and immediately contacted the police and emergency services after realizing that something disturbing had happened. When the police arrived at the scene, they found Andy Ostroy in tears. He was shaken and took a long time to recover. The investigators concluded that the successful actress and director had voluntarily ended her life. Andy, however, immediately rejected this idea. He didn't even try to accept this version of events. The husband knew very well that his wife never had problems with depression, psychological disorders, or any addictions. Not the slightest prerequisite that could lead a person to voluntarily end their life was found. Quite the opposite. Her career was booming at the time. Everything was going well. Each subsequent production seemed better than the last. Adrienne Shelley had a wonderful relationship with her husband and a small daughter whom she loved very much. This version also raised many questions from a moral perspective. Adrienne had lost her father at the age of 12, so she would never do that to her daughter. However, law enforcement agencies continued to insist that a depressive state is not always linked to problems in private and family life. All of this can happen unnoticed and in secret. On the outside, a person may even appear completely normal and happy until the last moment, and no one will know what serious difficulties they were actually struggling with during this time. Andy would not give up. He constantly pressured law enforcement agencies, demanding a more thorough investigation. He considered the initial conclusion absurd. His wife had been murdered, and Andy Ostroy was determined to prove it. A tough fight lay ahead because the autopsy revealed that Adrienne Shelley's cause of death was the sheet tied around her neck. But even after that, the widowed Andy increased the pressure and continued to insist that the case be treated as a murder. Naturally, such claims needed a solid foundation. There was no blood or sign of a struggle in the office. Practically nothing to suggest that an outsider had been in Adrienne's studio the day she died. But there were some oddities. Would a person who was ready to voluntarily end their life go grocery shopping and act as if they had plans for tomorrow? Upon closer examination of the crime scene, something suspicious was found. There was a barely visible shoe print on the toilet lid. It was therefore suspected that the prints could actually belong to an unknown person. It looked as if the intruder or the victim herself had stood on the toilet lid to reach the shower rod and tie the sheet. It could also have helped lift the victim's body. It was obvious to Andy that this trace was left by the perpetrator. The man said that his wife was so obsessed with the cleanliness of the studio that she even set up a special cupboard and a display case next to the door, where everyone who came in had to put their shoes and boots. She didn't allow anyone to walk around the apartment without taking off their shoes. The man had witnessed repeatedly how people who forgot this rule became the subject of extreme displeasure on his wife's part. It is obvious that only a person who entered the premises without her consent, without asking Adrienne Shelley for permission, could have left a shoe print on the toilet lid. His words were confirmed by everyone close to the actress who had visited the studio at least once. The investigators decided to pay more attention to the footprints. They checked the profile and analyzed the size of the shoes. The results confirmed the statements of the widowed man. The pattern did not match the configuration or size of the shoes worn by Adrienne and her husband. Furthermore, fingerprints were found on the shower rod that did not belong to the deceased. Attempts were made to remove them, but not thoroughly enough. Everyone in the deceased's immediate vicinity was checked, but no one wore similar shoes. The fingerprints also did not match the couple's acquaintances. The analysis of the marks on the toilet lid showed that they originated from chalk or similar dust. Apparently, this type of dirt is rarely found in offices and apartments where no renovation work or similar activities are taking place. The investigators suspected that the trace could have come from someone involved in the construction or renovation trade in some way. Initially, it was assumed that Adrienne was expecting a tradesman that day. However, no one had heard anything about this. The woman would certainly have told her husband about it, but the studio was actually fine. Adrienne did not need the services of a tradesman. One of the investigators handling the case recalled something strange. When the actress was found dead, a noise could be heard in her studio. There were sounds of hammering and drilling. The police naturally treated this assumption with a degree of skepticism, but decided to check it out. Renovation work was indeed underway beneath Adrienne Shelley's studio. The apartment belonged to a man who had nothing to do with the victim and didn't even know her. He confirmed that men were working there on November 1 to complete the final phase of renovations. He himself was not living in the apartment at the time, as the construction company had to tear down walls and erect new partitions. This seemed strange, as such work produces a large amount of dust that leaves white marks. The apartment owner allowed the investigators to look around the apartment freely. There was still a large amount of dust which was taken away for examination. It was later confirmed in the laboratory that it was identical to the footprints left in Adrienne's apartment. This meant that one of the employees had been in her office. The investigators then turned to Bradford's general contractor, who had provided the men for the job. The police were interested in who exactly was on the construction site during this time. Difficulties arose at this stage. It was common practice for this organization to employ workers who were not officially hired to keep the cost of the work low. This was common in the United States at the time when the influx of migrants began. Many of the employees were here illegally and without a visa. After some time, however, the project organizer was able to list all the people who were in the apartment on November 1. The main suspect turned out to be Diego Pilco. At that time, the man was only 19 years old. He came to the USA shortly before the tragedy and immediately took a job at Bradford to save money for starting his own business. First, he wanted to pay back a man in his home country of Ecuador who had lent him money for the relocation to the USA. The man behaved strangely, sometimes even fearfully. Diego was quickly found. He was still working for the organization. The man was taken to the station for questioning, and the investigators did not beat around the bush. He was asked directly about the murder of Adrienne Shelley. Contrary to expectations, Diego did not begin to deny it and immediately confessed. This happened almost immediately after he was in the office. When he told his version of events, he repeatedly mentioned that it was an accident. He insisted that he was a good person who was only in a desperate situation and struggling with financial problems. According to his confession, on November 1, he was in the apartment below Adrienne's studio with several young men. They were all carrying out one of the final tasks. There was a lot of noise because the walls were being torn down, but it seemed like a normal job. According to Diego, who came downstairs an hour after the work began, the young woman was very unhappy about the noise. She was rude, shouted at them, and claimed that the workers were preventing her from concentrating. Diego described her behavior as if the stranger was trying to belittle him, believing that her work was more important. She demanded that the workers not make any noise, which seemed absurd to him, as tearing down walls is not quiet. Furthermore, the young people were not violating any regulations. They calmly explained the situation to Adrienne Shelley, but the woman didn't listen, went into the apartment and began throwing her hands up. In a fit of rage, Diego grabbed a hammer and threw it in her direction. The actress miraculously managed to dodge the tool. After that, she started screaming even louder and threatened to call the police. With those words, the woman left the apartment and went upstairs. Diego followed her. He realized he had overreacted and begged Adrienne not to call the police. He was afraid that there would be trouble and that he would be threatened with deportation to his home country. Adrienne didn't listen to him. She was angry. When she entered her studio, Diego grabbed her sleeve and pulled her, continuing to plead with her not to call the police. She probably understood this as an attack and started screaming. Diego lost control again and hit the woman in the face. She then fell, hit her head, and stopped moving. The young man assumed that he had misjudged his strength and that the woman died from the blow to the head. He fell into a real panic. The construction worker locked himself in the office and began to think about how to proceed. Adrienne did not get up or regain consciousness. Diego finally realized that he had killed a person. He then decided to cover up the traces of the crime, so he took a sheet from the bed and staged a voluntary departure from life in the bathroom. That was the young man's original confession, but the police did not believe him. The first inconsistency that the police officers noticed was the complete absence of dust on the deceased's shoes. If she had really gone into the apartment where the repair work was taking place, as the murderer claimed, her shoes would inevitably have left traces. Furthermore, the actress's shoes were on a specially prepared cabinet, so she took them off, which also did not fit the young man's story. According to his words, she simply did not have time to take off her shoes and put them there. Another major contradiction was the complete lack of witnesses to Adrienne Shelley's outbursts. Even other employees did not confirm the perpetrator's statements that the woman came to them and cursed. During this time, there were enough neighbors in the apartments who should have heard the scandal and the noise the actress was making, but no one heard anything. Another inconsistency was discovered by Andy. The deceased's husband pointed out the lack of cash in his wife's wallet. Even though she was a person who preferred to use banknotes instead of credit cards, she always carried at least a few $100s with her, sometimes larger amounts for various needs. This small peculiarity made the probable motive easy to understand. The illegal immigrant simply wanted to enrich himself at Adrienne's expense. Most importantly, however, the medical examiner determined that the circumstances of the woman's death did not align with the perpetrator's version. Shelley was still alive when she was hanged, and the cause of death was strangulation. No head trauma was found. Despite all the inconsistencies, Diego maintained the version that Adrienne Shelley herself had provoked the conflict for a long time. Under the pressure of the obvious contradictions, Diego's story began to change. The investigators spoke with the suspect's inner circle to get a sense of what kind of person he was. Unfortunately, he had hardly any contact with anyone outside of work. Everyone who did business with him knew that Diego Pilco was in financial difficulties and desperately trying to pay off his debts. Otherwise, he seemed like a normal young man who wanted to establish himself in the United States. In conversations with the residents of the apartment building, several witnesses were found who reported Diego's suspicious behavior. According to one woman, the suspect had the unpleasant habit of staring at women for a long time. These glances seemed disturbing. However, no one noticed any aggression on his part, nor did he attack anyone. Andy continued to insist that Diego's version was a lie. He was only trying to justify himself. His spouse was never aggressive and always treated other people's work with respect. No matter what, the lack of cash in the wallet, however, pointed to Diego's true intention. He may have been in Adrienne Shelley's apartment to commit a robbery. No equipment, devices, or other valuables were missing, but a few $100s were gone. Shortly before the trial, which was scheduled for 2008, the defendant presented a new version that seemed more convincing than the previous one. According to him, Diego Pilco arrived at his workplace along with Adrian. As they rode the elevator, he stared at the young woman. Suddenly, he realized that he had seen the actress somewhere and quickly realized that he had a celebrity in front of him. Diego immediately concluded that she had money and decided that this was a chance to solve all his financial problems. In his opinion, there was definitely something to steal in the actress's apartment. He pretended to go up to the top floor to find out where Adrian got off and which apartment she went into. He watched and listened all day, calculating the moment the woman left the apartment, probably to go to the store. She returned a short time later and, as was her habit, undressed, leaving her clothes and shoes in the cabinets. The woman carried her bags. She did not lock the door behind her because her hands were full. She went into the kitchen, apparently to sort the groceries she had bought. Diego closely observed her every step. Standing on the landing, he saw that the door was ajar and a bag with a wallet was hanging out. The temptation was irresistibly great and he had the opportunity to steal. The intruder cautiously looked into the apartment, determined that Adrian could not see him, so he went inside, took the wallet, and took out the cash. Just as he was about to pocket it, the woman came back and confronted him. And she screamed and went to the phone, apparently to call the police. Diego panicked, caught up with her and covered her mouth and nose. Quite quickly, she became unconscious due to the strangulation. He realized that it was too risky to leave a robbed victim alive. Adrian Shelley had seen the worker downstairs more than once and could easily identify the robber. The intruder decided to stage a voluntary death and used a sheet and the shower rod to do so. He confirmed that he stood on the toilet lid to reach the victim and hang her. In court, the perpetrator apologized to the actress's family, whose creative path had been tragically interrupted. Of course, no one would forgive him. Andy hoped that it would be possible to achieve a life sentence for this subhuman. The court's decision was all the more shocking. Diego was sentenced to 25 years in prison for manslaughter. He would be released from prison shortly before his 45th birthday. Although the verdict seemed unjust, it was final. After all these tragic events, Andy wanted to immortalize his wife's name in history. He founded a foundation of the same name which provides scholarships and financial incentives for young female directors. Furthermore, her husband made a film about her, showing the tragic path of this strong woman. For the final episode, he even met Diego in person, who gave a brief interview and told the story of his villainy on camera. Thank you for watching and take care of yourselves. Sometimes you don't need a reason to kill, at least it can be fictitious. Criminals who choose their victims purely for fun or the pleasure of killing are rare, but they are fondly remembered for the brutality and bloodthirstiness of their atrocities. In the state of Missouri, USA, there is a city called St. Joseph. It is a small town with many parks, museums, and other attractions. There are a large number of jogging paths and places for walking. In one of the parks, called Hook, a man went for a jog on Sunday, October 16, 2016. However, this workout was strikingly different from the others. Near the end of the path, out of sight, the man noticed something suspicious on the path. He assumed it was a mannequin because he remembered that the day before had been Halloween and such an object on a nighttime path didn't seem unusual. The holiday was approaching, so the athlete continued jogging calmly. As he approached the object, he noticed blood on the dummy. However, it wouldn't have been difficult to paint over. At first, the man simply kept running, but something alerted him and made him come back. The mannequin looked suspiciously like a real person. There was a hole in the chest area and the entire body was covered in blood. It was the body of a young woman. She may have been a minor. She was lying naked in a pool of blood on the sidewalk. The horrified witness called 911. Even after contacting the dispatcher, he wasn't sure it wasn't a mannequin. The incident occurred in mid-October, 2 weeks before Halloween, a time when one can encounter all sorts of strange things. Perhaps it was a Halloween prank or a holiday decoration. When police arrived at the scene to investigate, the witnesses' worst fears were confirmed. It was indeed the body of a young woman. The perpetrator hadn't even bothered to cover the evidence of his crime. Just 1 meter from the body, pieces of clothing were found that turned out to be cleanly cut. Furthermore, the girl's fake nails were scattered around the body. This suggests that she had fought back desperately and all of her nails had been damaged in the struggle. Upon examining the crime scene, forensic experts were unable to find any identification documents. The girl had no personal belongings, means of communication, or the murder weapon with her, which would help them draw any initial conclusions. The first step was to determine the identity of the victim of the brutal massacre. The only thing that could help the police was a T-shirt stating that she was a student at Central High School, class of 2017. It was assumed that she was a senior preparing to graduate the following year. The victim's fingerprints were collected, but no matches were found in the national database, which was not surprising given the girl's approximate age. It is unlikely that she committed the crimes. The authorities were forced to close the park to the public for the next 24 hours to further search the area and identify the victim. A major operation was launched, involving many additional police officers. This operation was successful. The broken pieces of the cell phone were found relatively quickly. It had been broken and disassembled into several pieces, which were scattered around the area. Over the next few days, the communication device was reassembled and fully recovered. Meanwhile, the coroner performed an autopsy on the body. This revealed that the girl had been brutally tortured before her death. Her throat had been slit twice, but that wasn't even the cause of her death. She received multiple stab wounds with a knife-like object, one of which pierced her liver and caused fatal bleeding. Without emergency treatment, a slit throat could have also resulted in the high school student's death. There were signs of prolonged strangulation on her face, but it's difficult to say what exactly was used since her throat was slit. The coroner suspects it was some kind of long piece of cloth. At the same time, several officers visited the school listed on the girl's T-shirt to identify the missing high school student. At the school, the officers spoke with the principal and teachers and were shown photos of the unidentified victim. The girl was recognized. The victim's name was Caitlin Root. She was a student there for a while and then homeschooled. Caitlin Root was born on November 11, 1998 into a large family. The girl had 5 sisters and 5 brothers. She was very positive, artistic, and funny, and loved to sing, dance, and be outdoors. Her last hobby was Pokémon hunting in the park, which was very popular at the time. However, not in the park where the body was found. She usually went for walks in Geit Park. Everything there was familiar, cozy, and safe for her. It was unclear what drew her to Hook Park, which was located in another, unfamiliar part of the city. It had been nice and quiet there, too. It had been a favorite spot for many runners until this tragedy occurred, however. There were also some remote and gloomy places where the locals rarely ventured. And that's exactly where her body was found. She had several close friends at school. The loss of Caitlin was a real shock for them, so the teenagers willingly cooperated with the investigation. When the Root family learned that their missing daughter's body had been found, they were heartbroken. Now they were desperate to find out who had so brutally murdered the victim, who was 3 weeks shy of her 18th birthday. Although Caitlin had a close relationship with the entire family, she was no longer living with them at the time of the incident. She had grown up and wanted more independence and freedom, so she temporarily moved in with her friend Crystal, who lived with her grandmother Sheila. Crystal's mother, Tabitha, lived nearby. She must have been in constant contact with the girl and could have noticed something suspicious. Police officers went to the house to speak with all the residents. The family with whom Caitlin was staying at the time noticed her disappearance and called the police. However, the victim could not immediately be connected to these people when they were identified. Police officers spoke with Crystal's family and finally obtained their first valuable lead. According to her mother Tabitha, Caitlin had an online argument with her boyfriend Mike just a few days before the crime. She had actually wanted to break up with him, but the situation got out of control and a heated argument ensued. The woman reported that the last meeting with this boyfriend ended in a fight, after which Caitlin suffered a bruise. This bruise was also discovered during the autopsy. This gave the police their first suspect to speak with. It wasn't possible to get to him immediately, but several of the young man's friends came forward. They all didn't believe Mike could hit Caitlin. As he wasn't prone to aggression and violence, he hadn't previously noticed such behavior. Nevertheless, the police wanted to speak with him personally. They gradually found witnesses who had seen the young man's car. The car was allegedly parked near Hook Park late in the evening, which strengthened their suspicions. Eventually, the police met with the friend. The belief that Mike had something to do with it was immediately confirmed, as the young man had numerous small wounds on his body and hands that looked like scratches. However, he stated that they were marks from branches he had sustained while riding his motorcycle. The boy said he had met Caitlin, and the last time they had seen each other was on Thursday, that is, a few days before the murder. The young man's friend had also come to the office that day. Everything was fine. According to him, the girl spent a lot of time with them, and there were no conflicts. Therefore, it was very unpleasant for him to hear that 2 days after this meeting, he received a call from an unknown person accusing him of beating women. The voice sounded threatening. The caller offered to meet with him and beat him because of this girl, and then simply hung up. The friend didn't understand what this meant. He thought something had happened to Caitlin. He immediately called his girlfriend, although there was no argument between them. The boyfriend was surprised when Caitlin also blamed him for the broken nose. After that, she simply hung up and ignored the rest of the calls. Any accusations of aggression and cruelty, especially when it came to hurting his girlfriend, the man considered absurd. Mike then posted several posts on his social media page accusing Caitlin of malicious acts. He believed she had instigated her friends and was plotting against him. The young man couldn't understand what this meant, and he simply didn't have the time to find out the details. It's worth noting that the man had an alibi for almost the entire Saturday and Sunday afternoon. He had visited several of his friends since early morning, and all of these meetings were confirmed. There was no sufficient time frame for an attack. Despite the suspicions, nothing substantial could be discovered against Mike except for the name of the next young man in question. The young man told investigators about Adam. In return, Caitlin told him about him. According to the deceased, this man was literally obsessed with her. He was behaving so disturbed that he began stalking her. He sent her ambiguous letters telling her he would take his own life if she didn't meet up with him. Eventually, the police tracked down a man whose behavior was truly concerning. They managed to discover that Adam had last communicated with his best friend via social media around 8 p.m. on October 15th. He had planned to meet up with her. To the police's surprise, it turned out that this best friend was the late Caitlin Root, who had complained about the young man's stalking. Adam added her to his list of best friends, likely to avoid highlighting his unhealthy attraction. Before meeting the new suspect, investigators decided to gather more information about him and interviewed his closest friends. They discovered that both Caitlin and Adam had gone to a party on the night of the murder and were allegedly spending time together there. Adam was with a few other friends. Witnesses were found who saw the entire group leave late that evening. The girl was with them. Several participants in the gathering were certain that everyone was going to Hook Park, where the body was later found. Remarkably, the young people returned without Caitlin and told everyone that she had just left with unknown persons. But this all seemed strange and out of character for them. When they checked the suspect's social media pages, it turned out that he began posting strange messages the day after the murder. Adam didn't specify what he had done, but clearly regretted some of his actions. When questioned, however, he insisted that he had nothing to do with the crime and that the post was about something else entirely. Instead, he told the police his version of events. According to Adam, as Caitlin left the party with the rest of the group, she received a message from a friend named Amanda. After a few brief messages, the friends agreed to meet up, to go to Hook Park. According to the new suspect, he told his girlfriend from the beginning that it wasn't a good idea to meet someone so late at night, especially not in a park he didn't know much about. Nevertheless, she ignored his advice and left. Adam insisted that he was just friends with Caitlin, he had no conflicts with her. He also considered the allegations of stalking and obsession absurd. He showed investigators their chat history, in which they found absolutely nothing suspicious. The rumors about his obsession with Caitlin were obviously greatly exaggerated. According to the young man's confession, the last time he saw his girlfriend was not far from where they were spending time with friends. She got into an SUV which picked her up, presumably by Amanda. Adam saw the car for the first time and didn't know who it belonged to. She wasn't recognized by the rest of the group at the meeting either. He insisted he thought Amanda had something to do with what had happened to Caitlin. Strangely, this story was immediately confirmed. Several witnesses among the young men who had attended the meeting had also seen Caitlin get into an unknown Santa Fe SUV, and Adam had stayed with them. Adam seemed very upset, even visiting the deceased's family and offering his condolences. Everyone believed he was sincere about this loss. He willingly helped the Root family cope with this devastating loss and even assisted Caitlin's family with the funeral. Further investigation confirmed that Caitlin had indeed been in contact with a certain Amanda. When investigators spoke with the deceased's father, it turned out that the man knew all of his daughter's close friends well, and there weren't many. Amanda was among them. According to the man, she and Caitlin had a complicated relationship. The teenagers were good friends. Then they argued and downright hated each other. It turned out that both Crystal's best friend and her mother, Tabitha, knew her. They both considered Amanda a very unpleasant person who left a bad impression. This is how the police became aware of Amanda and decided to meet her. She was arrested and subjected to interrogation. Amanda didn't immediately disclose all known information about the case and even reported that Caitlin was not dead but missing. From the beginning, Amanda acted as if she had no idea what was going on. According to her, she neither called nor saw her friend on that fateful night, as Adam and his friends claimed. Their last conversation took place on Saturday afternoon. She even provided her social media account to the police so investigators could verify her statements. She used the pseudonym Amanda Panda without photos. As it turned out, there were several such impersonal accounts in Caitlin's contact list. Amanda continued to deny having communicated with or met her friend on Sunday and even provided an alibi. She reported that her neighbor Tina could confirm that she had spent the entire evening at home. The police officers verified the information they received. The woman immediately confirmed her alibi and stated that she had seen Amanda in the house several times throughout the evening, including at the approximate time of the attack. They had crossed paths and met several times, which ruled out her friend's involvement in the crime. Amanda had no intention of going anywhere, as she had spent the entire evening at home in her house clothes. After this confirmation, the police were forced to release her. All possibilities were explored, but nothing yielded results. The investigation reached a dead end. The story became so convoluted due to the many people involved that things got out of hand. So the police accessed the victim's cell phone to search for clues. This is how they succeeded. Investigators were able to access the gallery and find the last photo taken before the brutal attack. There were no people in the picture, but the frame showed the facade of a store that investigators were able to locate in the city. It was located about 5 kilometers from Caitlin's apartment. Based on surveillance footage of the storefront, a vehicle resembling Amanda's SUV was located. As this photo was taken, a dark-colored car pulled up to the store and a man with a limp got out. He bought some snacks and immediately drove away. Unfortunately, this did not yield any clues, as the store employees could not remember anyone and the image was too blurry. Police officers were forced to further examine the deceased's cell phone. They were able to determine that Caitlin had communicated with an individual named Amanda Panda. However, it was a different account with the surname Dowell. Based on the correspondence on this account, it was determined that Caitlin had communicated with this individual on the night of the murder. A brief conversation took place between them. They agreed to meet for a smoke. As it turned out, this account was used by a young woman named Amanda Bennett. This was the same Amanda who had caught the attention of the authorities, and she likely had multiple social media accounts. She was a 17-year-old who was, at the time, in a serious relationship with her 18-year-old boyfriend, Sebastian Dowell. Police went to the address where the young people lived. They immediately found a dark Santa Fe SUV, similar to the one recorded on the store's surveillance cameras, which Caitlin had filmed before her death. The evidence regarding the couple was enough to make them prime suspects. Amanda and Sebastian were arrested. They provided an alibi, which, however, could not be immediately verified. It was decided to take them into custody and confiscate the vehicle and cell phones for investigation. Investigators interviewed the young couple separately. When they spoke to Amanda, they didn't tell her how far the investigation had progressed, but simply decided to reconstruct the chronology of Friday's events. This was a clever move. The police were actually interested in Saturday and Sunday. If Amanda remembered Friday well but then said she couldn't remember anything about Sunday, it would have seemed suspicious. This is a trick police often use during interrogations to catch a criminal. She described in great detail the Friday evening she spent with her boyfriend and their 2-month-old baby. The difficulties began when she was asked about Saturday afternoon. Suddenly, she started to say that it had actually happened on Saturday. She had just mixed up the days. Sebastian, meanwhile, was also having trouble. He couldn't remember what he had done with his girlfriend in the past few days. His words were increasingly inconsistent with the story he had already told. It seemed as if Amanda had prepared for this meeting with the police but was a bit confused. While her boyfriend hadn't had any time at all, he couldn't even say anything about the film, which, according to Amanda, they had seen together in the cinema. She described it in detail. When the young man was pointed out the obvious inconsistencies in their stories, he became nervous. The police then noticed some cuts on his hands. Sebastian said they were from a cat, but then he changed his story and admitted that they might have been cuts from his knives. The young man had a number of stabbing weapons in his collection. The investigators already knew this. During the arrest and search, several knives were taken from the young man's collection in the hope of finding Caitlin Root's blood on them. Later, an expert examination confirmed that one of the knives actually contained particles of the victim's blood. During the conversation, it became clear that Sebastian played a subordinate role in the relationship. He confirmed this, saying that Amanda had 100% control over everything that happened and that he was subordinate to her. According to him, she completely excluded strangers from her social circle. He didn't even have friends he could choose himself. In fact, he only communicated with his lover's circle, which included only women. This was also confirmed in the couple's correspondence, as Sebastian complained that he had to ask permission for every one of his desires. For example, he liked to smoke, but only with his girlfriend's consent. She was jealous and rude, and in a fit of rage, she often hit Sebastian quite severely. Once, she even broke his ribs. According to the young man, he feared that Amanda would one day kill him with a knife. The last threatening incident of this kind occurred just a month before the Caitlin Root tragedy. Sebastian reported that Amanda suffered from some kind of mental disorder that would suddenly cause her to become aggressive. They had seen a therapist shortly before the crime, but the doctor had simply doubled the dosage of the medication she was taking. But Sebastian wasn't so innocent either. His social media page was full of dark posts featuring black humor, violence, and murder scenes. He seemed obsessed with these topics. The young man's story was immediately refuted. He changed his statement and said he had gone to the movies with his lover, but the couple was never seen on the video recordings. There were no tickets or purchase dates to confirm that the young people had even been in the area that weekend. Amanda's story could not be confirmed either. The suspicious couple had clearly lied to the police officers. Although investigators didn't discuss the real reason for the young men's arrest, it turned out that Sebastian knew about the murder in the park. The young man insisted he'd learned everything about it on social media, but he'd already been caught lying. The more nervous he became, the more his story changed. Eventually, he admitted he knew Caitlin and that they were quite close. Since then, Amanda and Caitlin had been good friends. She even came to the hospital to congratulate them when the baby was born. At that moment, she spoke warmly about the man's appearance, and this hurt the woman in labor. From that moment on, the indirect confirmation emerged that the tragedy was triggered by the jealousy of the inadequate Amanda. Initially, the friend denied such suspicions, but then revealed that his partner had noticed that he and Caitlin had complimented each other on several occasions. He continued to deny any romantic relationship between the two, claiming they were only friends. At the same time, he claimed he was not involved in the crime. One of Amanda's friends said she had always been friendly, sociable, and positive. However, after the birth of the child, the situation changed dramatically. Amanda became irritable and nervous, which many attributed to postpartum depression. She also believed that more than just a friendship could develop between Sebastian and Caitlin. Amanda referred to them very often and was clearly angry. She was very jealous of her boyfriend, judging by her friend's words. The whole thing developed into an obsession with getting rid of her rival. Communication between the investigators and the suspect continued, and it turned out that Amanda also knew many details of the crime that coincidentally could not have been disclosed because they hadn't been published in the media. The conversation transitioned seamlessly to the topic of relationships and the baby, and she even changed her face. When they talked about Caitlin and Sebastian, it was clearly a sore subject for her, but she pulled herself together and didn't open up. Strangely, throughout the entire interrogation, with the exception of this moment, Amanda had shown no regret or pity for her friend. On the contrary, from the very beginning, she was in a good mood and giggled incessantly, as if she were glad her rival was no longer alive. Given the circumstances in which she found herself, her behavior seemed sinister. The true intentions of the bloodthirsty couple came to light when the police searched the young parents' home. There was a feeling the two were involved in something sinister. There were records of demon summoning, sacrifice, and possession. At the station, Sebastian confirmed that he and his girlfriend dabbled in all sorts of dark topics. However, it was all just a hobby and role-playing, so they hadn't gone too far and hadn't committed any crimes. However, an examination of the prime suspect's cell phones revealed that they had planned the murder in stages. Although the information had been deleted, it was easily recovered. All of this became the most important incriminating evidence against the two criminals. When both learned of this, they abruptly changed their tactics, recanted, and began blaming each other. Investigators assumed the murder was a ritual sacrifice, one of many the two monsters planned to commit. Based on their correspondence and the recordings found in the house, both perpetrators were charged with first-degree murder. Upon reviewing their dialogue, the horrifying truth about this brutal massacre came to light. The murder was indeed ritualistic. That evening, the two sent a text message to 6 contacts from their acquaintance list in an attempt to lure one of the victims into a trap. They likely didn't care who responded. Only Caitlin Root responded, and that automatically became their punishment. The jurors were shocked by the senselessness of this act of violence, but remained convinced that it was Amanda who initiated the murder and took her rival's life with pleasure. Her fingerprints were found on the murder weapon, and Sebastian likely helped her restrain the victim. Both defendants were sentenced to life imprisonment after this sensational trial. The verdicts were announced on May 5, 2017, and Sebastian Dowell would be eligible for parole after 25 years. This was only possible because the jurors were not convinced that the young man intended to kill. It was assumed that he was the victim of manipulation by his lover. Therefore, the young father was found guilty of second-degree murder. The prosecution was dissatisfied with this decision, but the judge also believed that Sebastian was under Amanda's influence. She, on the other hand, was found guilty of first-degree murder and was denied parole. Caitlin Root's family was satisfied with the decision, except for Sebastian's parole opportunity. They said that 25 years later, they will attend the parole hearing and do everything they can to keep him behind bars. Thank you for watching and take care of yourselves. If you lead a double life, you can be an easy target for criminals. A criminal can hide behind the sweetest and most innocent image of a person. In 1994, Miranda Dean was born in the small town of North Pole, Alaska, USA. Her mother's name was Elizabeth. The father's name is reliably unknown. The man was not interested in the child's fate from the beginning. The girl also had an older sister named Ashley. The two girls were raised by a single mother. From the start, their life was not easy. At just 2 years old, Miranda was diagnosed with congenital hip dysplasia. Because of this, she had to wear a special brace from a young age to be mobile. This was, of course, difficult for her. The girl was often seen as an outsider. Things were going badly for her mother, Elizabeth. There were problems at work. She couldn't handle her daughters. During this time, she received support from her sister, whose husband was named Richard. He was a soldier and seemed like a decent man. The two often came to her house and even babysat the children sometimes. And the man readily offered his help even in his wife's absence. However, as it turned out, his initiative was of a much darker nature. When Miranda and Ashley were 5 and 6 years old respectively, Richard raped the girls. The man persuaded the children not to tell anyone about the incident. Only after several years did the eldest daughter find the strength to overcome the fear and speak about the torment. This is how Elizabeth found out that the man close to her had been raping her children for years. When she contacted the police and officers searched Richard's house, they found a diary documenting all the sexual assaults on the girls. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison but was released after 4 years for good behavior. It was also the first criminal episode in Richard's life which contributed to his parole. The child rapist was released when Miranda and Ashley were 9 and 10 years old respectively. At that time, they were still struggling with the effects of the psychological trauma and experiencing it in different ways. When the mother and children learned that the perpetrator would be released, it was a huge shock. Elizabeth and her children decided to move to another city. During this time, her situation kept getting worse. There were financial difficulties and the family had been abused by a loved one. All of this became a major problem. In their hometown, there was practically no support left and it was impossible to live near the threat. The single mother hoped for a fresh start, but moving did not help them cope with the consequences of the inflicted psychological trauma. From the age of 12, Miranda began to display rebellious behavior. She started spending time in the company of older teenagers who turned out to be dysfunctional. She took illegal substances and drank constantly. These were 15 to 16-year-old teenagers into whose company a 12-year-old girl fell. To fit into this strange group, she also began to do all these things. During this time, she met Forrest. At the time, he was 24 years old and the guy was notorious. Unfortunately, from a young age, Miranda was attracted to such lowlifes. Thanks to this acquaintance, Miranda managed to become part of the society of teenagers with unconventional interests. They called themselves a satanic group and most people considered them dark and dangerous. The schoolgirl didn't spread the word about becoming a member of this group, but clearly joined thanks to Forrest. The man had lured her into a kind of ritual after which her soul belonged to him. When Miranda finally told her mother what had happened, Elizabeth tried to sever all her daughter's contacts with this unhealthy society. Unfortunately, it didn't help. The teenager's behavior only worsened. She began running away from home frequently, became addicted to hard illegal substances. Her school performance deteriorated significantly, as did her relationships with her classmates. She became very aggressive and often provoked fights. The situation continued to deteriorate. Elizabeth herself suffered from similar addictions and was now reaping the consequences. Unexpectedly, the biological father intervened at this stage of the child's life. As far as is known, this was the only serious influence he had on the teenager's life. At his urging, Miranda was placed in a psychiatric clinic to help her cope with the effects of her trauma. She was prescribed medication and diagnosed with a mental disorder. Unfortunately, it helped little, according to people familiar with the dysfunctional family. At the age of 16, Miranda decided to drop out of school and never get an education, but she also immersed herself in wild parties with her unpleasant company. She began a series of relationships with older men, by one of whom she became pregnant. Although she decided to keep the child, she didn't even know who the biological father was. In parallel, the relationship with her family deteriorated to the extreme. Ashley couldn't bear to see her mother and sister become outcasts and was forced to leave the house, so the only support for the rebellious girl was gone. Elizabeth was also already on a downward spiral at this point. She was heavily addicted and looked very bad. After her first overdose, social services decided to take her youngest daughter Miranda away. So the problem-laden teenager went to a new family in the small town of D, North Carolina, and there she met a 20-year-old man named Elliot Barber. Miranda was 17 years old at the time, and the young man was engaged to a girl who was expecting his child. Her name was Emai, and she was also a 17-year-old student. The result was a kind of love triangle between a 20-year-old boy and two underage pregnant girls at once. The children were born about a month and a half apart. Now they had two newborns to care for. However, neither of them was truly mature enough to handle the responsibility. This almost changed tragically. A few months after the children were born, Elliot's own daughter was hospitalized with an overdose of sedatives. The behavior of the child's biological father had always been problematic, and from then on it got worse. The relationship with his fiancée began to deteriorate. She decided to break up with the inadequate man, broke off the engagement, and moved with the child to another city. So Elliot and Miranda found each other, became a full-fledged couple, and began raising little Aria together. During this time, Miranda willingly talked about her difficult past. This is how Elliot learned about the Satanist sect and became very fascinated by the topic. The couple began regularly exchanging ideas on this subject. After about a year of their relationship, they decided to leave North Carolina because the young people's families disapproved of their lifestyle. This escape was necessary to increase the distance between them and avoid constant conflicts and surveillance by the older generation. So began a series of moves together with little Aria. They couldn't settle down anywhere for a long time. There were difficulties with finding employment. The final destination was a suburb in Pennsylvania, a small community called Portrayon, where only about 400 people lived at the time. The young parents had no money and no job to settle down as they had before. But here Elliot had a friend and they visited him. The man was about the same age and offered the family a room to share until the Barbers got back on their feet. However, since they were outcast young people, it wasn't easy to find a proper job. They were so unsociable that it was impossible to start a conversation with a stranger. This also complicated their situation considerably. The couple got married on October 22, 2013. To find a source of income, Miranda decided to offer herself as an escort. However, on the website, she emphasized that she was not offering intimate services but was much more willing to make connections and accompany men to various events. Outwardly, she seemed quite nice and it paid off. She met various men and chatted with them for $80 without any intimate contact occurring. It's hard to say if she really respected those stated boundaries. In any case, she met a man named Troy LaFerrara, who turned out to be a 42-year-old married man. He had been married for a few decades, was a decent family man and church member, but he led a second life on the side. On one hand, he was a respectable member of society, on the other, a regular client of call girls. When he saw the new young woman's ad, Troy was immediately interested in the offer. As soon as he called, he immediately offered Miranda a different kind of service. Not accompaniment to dinners, but intimacy. She was upset about this, refused him, and pointed out what was stated in her account. However, once she calmed down, disturbing thoughts came to her. Miranda and Elliot realized that this was a fairly wealthy man, as he had made a very generous financial offer. After discussing it, the young people realized they could make money through crime. Even before, they had repeatedly fantasized painfully about murder. But now they began to see in it not only a secret desire, but also a way to solve their financial difficulties. In general, Elliot and Miranda had been drawn to this topic from the beginning of their relationship. They immediately showed a shared interest in satanic rituals and were particularly interested in sacrifices and ritual acts. They even used the theme in their role-playing during intimacy. In their fantasies about murder, they doused each other with fluids representing blood. They didn't plan to kill a specific person, but their conversations often ended with the thought that sooner or later they would find their victim and find out what it was like to take a human life. When Troy made his generous offer, the young women immediately activated their sick fantasies. Miranda had sinister thoughts, and after the unpleasant offer, she began discussing the situation with Elliot. Troy lived in another city. The conversation was conducted over the internet and could easily be deleted by deleting the profile. They were in no way connected in real life, which made the man the perfect victim for a ritual murder. The criminals realized they could make good money from this and fulfill their long-cherished dream. A few hours later, Miranda accepted Troy's offer and texted the unsuspecting victim. They arranged to meet in a supermarket parking lot on the outskirts of town. She would be sitting in her car. Miranda offered to drive to the neighboring suburb. There, according to the escort, was her summer house, which she used for her work. Of course, she didn't just take the initiative. Her boyfriend was supposed to be sitting in the back seat of the car, helping her realize her dark fantasies. He was to be camouflaged with clothes and a blanket. The aspiring killers hatched a plan. Miranda would say a code phrase, upon which Elliot would attack the victim. The meeting was set for November 11, 2013. This date was not chosen by chance, as it was the boyfriend's birthday. At the appointed hour, a Honda CR-V was waiting for the man in the shopping center parking lot. He got in and immediately paid her the agreed amount. They drove to the neighboring town, also small and remote. But Miranda didn't go to the house she talked about, instead going to a remote location, a quiet, deserted street in the wooded belt. Here she stopped and said a code phrase, whereupon a wire was looped around Troy LaFerrara's neck. Elliot pulled it as tight as she could, but they had miscalculated his strength. The chosen victim turned out to be a fairly robust and strong man. He had enough strength to open the door and even put a foot on the street. Elliot quickly weakened. Miranda gradually became nervous because the matter should have been finished long ago, but things weren't going according to plan. The criminals hadn't expected such strong resistance, but the worst was when the criminals saw car lights in the distance in her rearview mirror. She realized they could be caught, and she drew the knives she had prepared for the slaughter. Miranda began stabbing her victim about 20 times in the chest, neck, face, and stomach. When Troy stopped resisting or even showing any sign of life, Elliot got out of the car, put his foot inside, and closed the door from the outside. Then she got back into the back seat and the car drove off. The young people made their way to another remote part of the suburb. Here they took a wallet, an expensive watch, jewelry, and everything they could find in his pockets except for a mobile phone. Elliot insisted it wasn't worth taking. After all, they could be located via geolocation. The two placed their victim's body by the roadside and drove away, believing they had committed the perfect crime. Next, Miranda and Elliot drove to the nearest Walmart, where they bought cleaning supplies to clean the interior of the car. These were special products for the seats and floor mats, as well as a pair of gloves they intended to use. The front of the car was stained with blood. They really needed more than an hour to clean everything thoroughly. For this, they drove to another remote location where the two diligently wiped away the blood. After that, it was decided to celebrate Elliot's birthday. They went to a restaurant and then to a strip club. Of course, they used the money they had stolen from their victim for this. The young people continued their normal life as if nothing had happened. The next day, a couple of onlookers found Troy's body. It wasn't even covered with branches or dirt. The man had simply been thrown away like trash with 20 stab wounds and strangulation marks on his neck. Of course, the witnesses immediately called the police. When officers arrived at the crime scene, they found not only the body but also the appliance cord used to strangle him. The body could be identified very quickly as there was a mobile phone in the pocket with which the owner could be identified. The police immediately looked at the call history records. It turned out that on November 11, he had only contacted 2 people. The first number was his spouse and the second was an unsaved contact. The police traced the call back to Miranda. All her data, including her place of residence, were obtained and she immediately aroused the interest of the investigators. Minutes later, the police were on their way to her apartment. There she was arrested and taken to the station for questioning. From the beginning, Miranda denied any involvement in the crime and any acquaintance with Troy whatsoever. Nevertheless, it was obvious that she was nervous and behaving suspiciously. It was enough to ask for her mobile phone for her statement to change. At first, she vehemently refused to give her phone to the police, but she had no choice. As the investigators examined the contents, the correspondence, and the contacts, Miranda became increasingly nervous. Still, it wasn't possible to find the needed information immediately. She had nothing to show for it and was simply released. When Miranda returned home, something changed in her. She poured her heart out to the first person she met. She confessed to the murder, but she did it so abruptly that it seemed like a bad joke. From the beginning, the young man tried to convince the criminal to go back to the police and confess everything. Her husband joined the conversation and acted as if he was surprised by the story. Miranda clearly felt remorse. She confessed to her buddy that she had stabbed the victim but said nothing about Elliot. The husband did not admit even once during the entire conversation that he was even present in the car. Even the friend felt that he was manipulating Miranda and trying to burden her with more guilt. This seemed strange and caused great concern. Instead of taking the blame, Elliot acted shocked and even began to cry. His buddy didn't suspect that Elliot could be involved in the crime. On the contrary, he believed he wasn't involved. Miranda struggled with inner doubts almost all night. Finally, around 4 a.m., she pulled herself together, returned to the police station, and told them about the murder, but insisted it was self-defense. Miranda now admitted that she had indeed arranged to meet the man, not for intimate services, but to accompany him for the evening. However, Troy changed his plans and insisted he was ready to pay for sex. When Miranda informed him that she was only 16 years old, he was disbelieving. She claimed that the man would be prosecuted if she reported him to the police. This was obviously a lie, as she was already 17 years old at the time. She was clearly trying to shift some of the blame onto the victim to justify her cruelty with his harassment. According to her, Troy, instead of backing off, began to forcibly try to make her intimate, and she had to defend herself. He allegedly became aggressive when he realized she didn't want to have sex with him for money. Miranda claimed that she felt her life was threatened and realized it could end tragically. She told them about her own uncle Richard, who had molested her as a preschooler. Of course, her words sounded unbelievable because the 20 stab wounds in various parts of his body, which didn't look like defense, hardly resembled an attempt to defend herself. Furthermore, the cord used to strangle the man was found with a mark on the victim's neck and his larynx was crushed. In Miranda's statement, the cord wasn't mentioned at all. Something was clearly wrong, and it seemed a third person was involved. To verify her statements, the police began tracking her movements before the encounter with Troy. It wasn't hard to find video footage taken just 5 minutes before the meeting in the parking lot. The footage clearly shows an unknown young man hiding in the back seat of a car. He could also be quickly identified. After determining it was the 22-year-old Elliot, Miranda's newlywed husband, the investigators decided to speak with the young man. The criminals had obviously not devised a plan, as at this point they didn't even have a coherent story. Finally, Elliot began to tell a story that was completely different from what Miranda had said. The investigators immediately noticed that she was very emotional, while her boyfriend showed no feelings whatsoever. He was cold but surprisingly easy to crack, as if he had long wanted to talk about the atrocity he had committed. When describing the crime, he briefly described the assault itself, but took much more time describing the list of purchases made with the stolen money. He vividly described the meals they had eaten on his birthday, as if the murder of the man didn't bother him at all against this background, and described the taste of the meat he had eaten after the massacre as if he killed daily. Both were subsequently arrested and held behind bars until the trial began. However, by that day they had both retracted their statements and were now professing their innocence. This stood in stark contrast to what Miranda had said on the eve of the hearing in a television program. Several journalists had spoken with her. Thus, the pretty woman became a participant in an interview that went viral. In it, she claimed this was not her first murder. Allegedly, after the 22nd murder committed between 2008 and 2013, she stopped counting the victims, but all this seemed absurd. Her family defended her, while everyone who knew her well insisted that she had lied her whole life. The reasons for such actions were always the same. Miranda simply wanted to draw attention to herself and enjoyed it. Nevertheless, the perpetrator insisted that all the murders began when she was a teenager and became a member of a satanic group which she was drawn to by a boy named Forrest. Miranda couldn't even provide the names of the victims but insisted on calling herself a serial killer. She claimed that her company only killed people who did bad things, for which she earned the nickname Dextrum. The investigators were forced to check these claims. In conversation, she was unable to say anything about these episodes, of which she admitted there were many more. In the area where she lived in Alaska during that time, there weren't even that many missing persons. It seemed as if this was all a blatant lie. Furthermore, her behavior clearly did not match that of an experienced criminal. She had even left the victim's mobile phone in his pocket. She didn't hide or destroy it, even though it was obvious that the communication device would allow the perpetrators to be reached. The only reason she might not have known this is that Miranda was lying. Troy LaFerrara had indeed been the first victim. During the investigation, it turned out that 2 other men had responded to Miranda's ad but didn't show up, thus saving their lives. However, there were also contrary opinions. Psychologists worked extensively with Miranda. Some of them were convinced that she had killed people before. Even Elliot had told many stories, including all these ritual murders. Listening to these stories had been one of his favorite activities during their relationship. The guy remained convinced that Miranda had killed other people. She spoke extensively and eloquently about these episodes but refused to repeat them to journalists, allegedly to avoid harming other participants in the murders. Elliot believed that his girlfriend was possessed by a demon during those times. He believed she was possessed. The prosecution was convinced that the criminals were trying to avoid the death penalty by reason of insanity in this way. All of this made the trials very complicated and lengthy. Before the hearings could begin, at least one of the many accusations against the inmates had to be proven or disproven. In 2016, things were still uncertain, but other upheavals had begun. Miranda's mother voluntarily took her own life. She couldn't withstand the public pressure that accused her of raising a monster. By that time, she had already been struggling with addiction problems and mental health issues for years. Those close to her believed the woman simply couldn't cope. She left no suicide note, so it's not known for sure what contribution the criminal daughter made to her decision. Many believed public pressure over Miranda was the deciding factor. In the same year, the offender, while sitting in prison, filed for divorce from Elliot. She repeatedly said that she was a victim. From the day she was born, Miranda was surrounded by manipulators, liars, rapists, and criminals. According to stories from gang members she belonged to, Miranda once told how she was tied to a bed and had an abortion at home. This happened when she told her mother she was pregnant and didn't know who the father was. Her boyfriend Forrest allegedly forced her into prostitution at the age of 12, but it's hard to say what is true. Although she was diagnosed with several disabilities in the hospital, it is not known if she ever took medication for attention deficit syndrome, schizophrenia, or bipolar disorder, which doctors suspected during her examinations at various times. The pathological liar felt the audience's attention and interest and continued to tell one story after another. Now she remembered the name of Aria's biological father, who in her opinion had been killed in another ritual. Then she began to say that she had gone to the police voluntarily because she wanted to be arrested to finally stop killing. According to another version, she had come to the station to have her daughter taken away so the child could be saved from the marginalized existence she led with her husband. The perpetrators were found guilty. However, difficulties arose in determining the sentence due to the young age of the attackers. The prosecution fought in vain for the death penalty, but without success. Organizations advocating for the abolition of the death penalty made an important contribution. Finally, in September 2014, they were sentenced to life in prison. Aria ended up in the care of foster services. Since the scandal attracted great attention, her first and last name were changed and she was placed in a foster family. The murder shocked Troy LaFerrara's wife the most. She had no idea he led a double life, but what shocked her even more was the tragic resolution of the case. Thanks for watching and take care of yourself.